What is Egoism? By Tadano, March 2020. Egoism is named after the word ego, which is Latin for I. Everyone around us has an ego, for which Max Stirner understood that we all have a drive to serve ourselves and the I, the self. This philosophical observation is also often seen in the sciences, as any serious scientist studying in the field of psychology or zoology can tell you that humans act for their own self-interest. It is then asked, is altruism a case against egoism? The answer is no, for which even Stirner argues that even altruism is a form of egoism on its own. Stirner said that altruism and cooperation and even community is made because it serves our ego in a way. Why do we work with other people? For our own interest. This is the meat and flesh of egoism. It's not at all complicated. Egoism means it's fine to murder and rape people. It's one of the many straw mans that unfortunately many leftists can easily fall into, as frustrating it is as just how plain false it is. For which Stirner said in a classic quote, I love men too, not merely individuals, but everyone. But I love them with the consciousness of egoism. I love them because love makes me happy. I love because loving is natural to me, because it pleases me. I know no commandment of love. I have a fellow feeling with every feeling being, and their torment torments. Their refreshment refreshes me too. I can kill them, not torture them. Egoism is not a rejection of altruism or collectivism. To call egoism an opposite to collectivism would just be plain false. It simply means to embrace an ego that is in all of us and live for ourselves and to respect each other's ego, uniqueness, and personality. The divine is God's concern, the human, man's. My concern is neither the divine nor the human, not the true, good, just, free, etc., but solely what is mine. And it is not a general one, but it is unique as I am unique. Nothing is more to me than myself. The roots of egoist thinking at its core is found in Max Stirner in his book, translated as Ego and Its Own, and Stirner's Critics, which are both incredible books to read, and you should read, it's not too long. Another belief of egoism, and Stirner in particular, is the opposition of property. There seems to be a lot of confusion of leftists on his ideas of property, by which we have to make one thing very, very clear. Stirner does not advocate for private property, just the opposite. He quotes, the laborers have the most enormous power in their hands, and if they once become thoroughly conscious of it and used it, nothing would withstand them. They would only have to stop labor, regard the product of labor as theirs, and enjoy it. This is the sense of the labor disturbances which show themselves here and there. The state rests on the slavery of labor. If labor becomes free, the state is lost. Stirner is not a capitalist. He was an anarchist in nature, even if he hasn't outright said it, and a socialist especially. He especially does not believe in private property, nor even normal property at all. He put in his book that property has to be fought for, harshly to be owned. You cannot own a property, personal or private, without violence. One cannot own a property by simply saying, this is mine, by which Stirner then observes that property is fought for in violence, the violence of the state and the bourgeoisie. The violence of the state and the bourgeoisie are spooked, handling themselves in the false idea of property, in which they then use to exploit and extract. To put this in a quote, property exists by grace of the law. It is not a fact, but a legal fiction. Stirner extensively goes on about this in the section of Ego and Its Own, known as political liberalism, in which he regularly critiques liberals and the state in exposing their spookedness and hatred towards the proletariat in a false sense of freedom and choice. In a quote, so runs the speech of commonality. The commonality is nothing else than the thought that the state is all in all, the true man, and that the individual human's value consists in being a citizen of the state. In being a good citizen, he seeks his highest honor. Beyond that, he knows nothing higher than its most antiquated being a good Christian. Another idea that egoists believe in is a union of egoists. The idea of organization by Stirner is not literal, but rather a metaphorical one. It simply means that a union of egoists is a group of voluntary people and or egoists that are in association with each other out of pure will, not due to some spook or inheritance. And Stirner's critics, Stirner brilliantly explains this concept further by writing, "It would be another thing, indeed, if Hess wanted to see egoistic unions not on paper, but in life. Faust finds himself in the midst of such a union when he cries, 'Here I am human, here I can be human.' Goethe says it in black and white. If Hess attentively observed real life, to which he holds so much, he will see hundreds of such egoistic unions, some passing quickly, others lasting. Perhaps at this very moment, some children have gone together just outside his window in a friendly game. If he looks at them, he will see a playful, egoistic union. Perhaps Hest has a friend or a beloved. Then he knows how one heart finds another, as their two hearts unite egoistically to delight, enjoy each other, and how no one comes up short in this. Perhaps he meets a few good friends on the street, and they ask him to accompany them to a tavern for wine. Does he go along as a favor to them, or does he unite with them because it promises pleasure? Should they thank him heartily for the sacrifice, or do they know that altogether they form an egoistic union for a little while?" And in another quote, he says, "We too, the state and I, are enemies. I, the egoist, have not at heart the welfare of this human society. I sacrifice nothing to it. I only utilize it. But to be able to utilize it completely, I transform it rather into my property and my creature. For example, I annihilate it and from it in its place and form in its place the union of egoists." To make things simple to understand, egoists believe that we have all an innate ego that we can activate at any time, an ego that works for a self-interest, that does not bow down to any spook or false idea that statists and or liberals will throw down on you. An ego that loves all egos while obliterating all that stands away or harm egos. For example, spooks, in which we will talk about in a second. What is a spook? A spook is a social construct, an abstract concept made up by society with no material basis, an immaterial spirit, a figment of the imagination. The motherland, the fatherland, nationalism, God, religion, morality, and the obligation to work under a capitalist society are all spooks. But it is not only man that haunts, so does everything. The higher essence, the spirit that walks in everything, is at the same time bound to nothing and only appears in it. Ghosts in every corner. Spooks are all around us, under the fake liberalism of the US or the fake ethno-nationalism of the DPRK. All spooks are created by humanity, usually for political power and purposes. To keep down ego and to keep down the freedom of the individual, to disallow the free association of individuals, to prevent the exploration of our ego. I hate capitalism because it's spooked, right? But I don't like the spooked way socialism is promoted and enforced. This can be seen in the ultranationalism of the USSR or DPRK, the obligation, the duty to build socialism, not because of an inner egoist desire, but because it's for the motherland, because I said so. Now continue work under state-owned property. No, I want socialism not because it's for a greater cause. I want socialism so I can really do whatever I want, like play League of Legends all day, or having intense gay sex with no risk of economic collapse due to medical bills, or to make whatever weird rude statues I can make just because. Stirner actually spent a section of the book criticizing socialism and socialists at the time. The section was called Social Liberalism, an ego in its own and how socialists can often be as spooked as normal liberals, in which, in a memorable quote, he says, "By the principle of labor, that of fortune or competition is certainly outdone. But at the same time, the laborer and his consciousness that the essential thing in him is the laborer, holds himself aloof from egoism and subjects himself to the supremacy of society of laborers, as the commoner clung with self-abandonment to the competition state. The beautiful dream of a social duty still continues to be dreamed. People think again that society gives what we need, and we are under obligations to it on the account, owe it everything. On that account, owe it everything. They are still at the point of wanting to serve a supreme giver of all good. That society is no ego at all, which could give, bestow, or grant, but an instrument or means from which we may derive benefit. That we have no social duties, but solely interests for the pursuance of which society must serve us. That we owe society no sacrifice, but if we sacrifice anything, sacrifice it to ourselves. Of this, the socialists do not think, because they, as liberals, are imprisoned in the religious principle and zealously aspire after a sacred society. For example, the state Hitharto. Two classic examples of spooks that invade us all is nationalism and the state. The state is a spook because it institutes and enforces laws that aren't real. Laws are not material in reality, thus must be violently enforced via state violence. Whether something as simple as a law to put logos on tax bills, or more extreme laws, one that actively harm people in the proletariat, for example, cops. Nationalism is a spook. The entire idea of countries is a spook. Borders are made up, thus has to be violently enforced via borders, guards, and the law. Nationalism is then, through another spook, culture, and is a deadly combination to not only enforce capitalism, but also put down the ego, in which it goes hand in hand with the idea of cultural hegemony, as brought forth by a Marxist, Antonio Gramsci. In many ways, the observations of the use of culture by Stirner and Gramsci are very similar, as Gramsci put in his books, that cultural hegemony is what happens when the bourgeoisie uses culture to put down socialism and class consciousness and enforce capitalism for any kind of reasons, as can be observed in U.S. liberal society, Philippines, Japan, and many other cultures. Culture in itself is a spook, if not the ultimate spook, as culture shapes entire societies. The study of culture is the study of a spook. Traditional customs, requirement to pray, requirement to cite a pledge of allegiance. Where do these ideas come from? All but figments of the imagination, a spirit, spook. We can see this dynamic, the dynamic between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat under capitalist societies, play out in many cultures, and how it intentionally or unintentionally enforces capitalism. I'll give you a classic example in Filipino society. The obligation to work and do well because responsibilidad moto, para to que Jesus. In the USSR, many workers have to keep doing labor for the motherland. In Imperial Japan, work or you will throw away your family honor. If you throw away your family honor, you must execute yourself. The worst example of this is fascist Germany. Fascism is dangerous because it abuses spooks in the worst way possible. Fascist ideology is riddled with spooks. The belief that one race is superior, that Jews bad because something, using Christianity to justify genocide, and the use of religion in general to be an ass. Fascism, anti-Semitism, race, inherent superiority, unfortunately, has not material and or scientific basis, but the fascists do not care why. It's not meant to be logical, pure reactionary to gain and use state violence under a fake coat of populism. Egoist analysis. Egoist analysis explains a lot of things. especially useful for understanding class conflicts and how the bourgeoisie abuses spooks to hinder the egos of the working class and force them to conform. If you think about it, Marx uses egoism unconsciously in his works to philosophically and scientifically explain bourgeois activity and what they do under capitalist society. While it is true that the bourgeoisie do things for their own ego, they do so in complete disrespect of the ego of others, in this case, the proletariat. As explained earlier, egoist analysis simultaneously explains why we are both not only egoistic, but also altruistic. The whole debacle about individualism versus collectivism is a false dichotomy. They're both great and useful to serve our egos. Egoist analysis is a nice philosophical reflection that confirms a lot of things that I thought about my experience as a Filipino and Filipino society. Like, why are we really altruistic? But at the same time, we're also individualistic. Why is the state always so rude and mean towards the poor people? Why does it feel like there's a massive disconnect between the poor and the rich? While these can be answered through Marxism, I found that egoism is much more useful tool in figuring this out. The liberating potential of egoism. Egoism is a liberating philosophy that explains a lot of my angers towards modern Filipino society. This is first seen and acknowledged by me when early in school, I continue to keep asking myself every year, why do we keep having to go to school? Why can't we just be free and do whatever we want? Even if education is so important, why are these teachers so strict about our lives, freedoms, uniqueness? The answer to this has always been, well, it's for your grades. You have to keep working when you're older. It's your responsibility as a human being. Then after that, they start to threaten you with terrible things that happen towards workers. If you don't want to work, you'll be living on the streets like those poor hobos. Do you want that? Do you want to live like a hobo? And I'm especially not alone here in these thoughts. Once I noticed and fully understood just how spook society is, that's when I've truly become so much more free and happy. I can only recall many days in grade school where I was left crying in my bed because I'm not good enough for society. And once I've fully taken in that these spooks don't matter, it made me so much better, happier, and free. I believe that this is the value in egoism as a philosophy, and together with other nihilistic postmodernist literature and philosophy, and that is why we must start reading Stirner and be free. It is especially valuable in the Philippines, as many other proletariats and people are spooked into religion, into responsibility, into human society as a whole.